You're standing in a cave 40,000 years ago. There's no light except fire. There's no explanation for thunder, for death, for why the sun disappears every night and somehow comes back. And somewhere in that darkness, one of your ancestors looks up and asks a question no animal on Earth has ever asked before. Why is any of this happening? That question is the reason gods exist. In the next few minutes, you're going to see exactly how, when, and why humans invented the divine, and by the end, you might never look at a church, a temple, or a prayer the same way again. Quick favor before we get into it, if channels like this one interest you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now let's get into it. For most of human history, there was no religion the way we understand it today. No churches, no scriptures, no priests in robes. But there was something else, something older, something buried so deep in the human brain that scientists now believe it might not even be a choice. It might be a byproduct of how we think. Let's start with the obvious question. If there's no God, why did practically every human culture on every continent independently invent one? Not one culture, not two, thousands of unconnected societies separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years all arrived at the same basic idea. Something is out there. Something is watching. Something caused all of this. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns have explanations. The first clue comes from something called agency detection. Imagine you're walking through grass 70,000 years ago and you hear a rustle behind you. You have two options. Option 1, you assume it's just the wind and you keep walking. Option 2, you assume it's a predator and you run. If it really was just the wind and you ran anyway, you wasted a little energy. Embarrassing, but you're alive. If it really was a predator and you assumed it was the wind, you're dead. Your genes don't make it to the next generation. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this created a brain that is wired to assume intention behind almost everything. Rustling grass, a shadow moving, a storm rolling in. Your ancestors' brains didn't just register these as random events. They registered them as something doing something. And once your brain is built to see intention everywhere, it's a very short leap to start asking who is doing it. Psychologists call this hyperactive agency detection, and it's still inside your brain right now. It's why you jump when a shadow moves in a dark hallway. It's why ancient people didn't see a drought as a random weather pattern. They saw it as someone being angry. It's why lightning wasn't electricity. It was a strike from something powerful, aimed at something or someone. The human brain doesn't do well with randomness. It craves a cause. And when no visible cause exists, the brain invents an invisible one. But agency detection alone doesn't explain gods. It explains ghosts, spirits, maybe a forest that feels watchful. To get from spirits to actual gods, something else had to happen first. Death. In Shanidar cave in Iraq, archaeologists found Neanderthal remains dating back roughly 50,000 to 70,000 years, buried with what appeared to be flowers and plant matter placed deliberately around the body. For decades, this was debated. Some argued the pollen was blown in by rodents. Others insisted it was intentional. But what's not debated is this. Neanderthals, a completely different species from us, were burying their dead with care, not just discarding bodies. Something in them understood that death mattered, that it deserved ritual. Now look at Sungir, a site in Russia dating back around 34,000 years. 2 children were buried there, covered head to toe in thousands of carefully carved ivory beads, an amount of labor that would have taken months to produce. Why would a community spend that much time decorating a body that would never move again? Because somewhere in the human mind, a terrifying question had taken hold. What happens after this? And once a species starts asking that question, it needs an answer, because living without one is almost unbearable. Here's the thing about death that no other animal seems to fully grapple with. We are the only species that knows with total certainty that we are going to die. Not instinctively fears danger in the moment, actually knows as an abstract fact years in advance. That knowledge is a psychological weight nothing else on Earth carries. And a mind capable of imagining its own end is also a mind capable of imagining what comes next. If the body stops but the mind can still picture the person, still dream about them, still feel their presence, then some part of the brain concludes they haven't fully disappeared. They've gone somewhere. This is where ancestor worship likely began long before organized religion. The dead didn't feel absent, they felt relocated. And if they were still out there somewhere, watching, maybe they could still help. Maybe they could still be angry. Maybe you needed to keep them happy. There's another piece of this puzzle that rarely gets mentioned, and it comes from something every single human experiences almost every night: dreams. Imagine you're an early human, and someone in your group dies. A few nights later, you dream about them. In the dream, they talk to you, they walk, they look exactly like they did before. To a modern mind, that's obviously just the brain processing memory and grief. But to an early human with no concept of neuroscience, that dream is evidence. If you saw them, if you heard them, if the experience felt real, then in some sense they must still exist somewhere. Anthropologists studying this call it one of the oldest possible triggers for belief in an afterlife. The dead person's body was gone, buried under stone or earth, but their presence kept showing up anyway, in dreams, in memory, in moments where the living swore they felt watched. The brain doesn't easily distinguish between a vivid dream and lived experience while it's happening. So when the dream felt real, the belief that followed felt just as real. Now combine this with something else humans developed that almost no other species has: theory of mind. This is the ability to understand that other beings have thoughts, intentions, and feelings different from your own. It's why you can guess what your friend is thinking, why you can tell when someone is lying, why you can imagine what an animal might want. This ability is incredibly useful for living in groups, but it comes with a side effect. Once your brain is built to model other minds, it starts modeling minds everywhere, even where there isn't one. The wind isn't just moving, it has a mood. The river isn't just flowing, it has a will. The mountain isn't just standing there, it's deciding whether to let you climb it. Humans didn't just detect agency, they built entire personalities around it. Put these three things together: agency detection, fear of death, and theory of mind, and you get the first gods. Not a lightning bolt from the sky announcing divine truth, but a slow, accumulating psychological pressure that built up over tens of thousands of years until it needed somewhere to go. Around 11,600 years ago, in modern-day Turkey, something happened that completely rewrote what archaeologists thought they knew about religion. A site called Göbekli Tepe was discovered. Massive carved stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged in circular structures decorated with animals, symbols, and abstract carvings. Here's what makes this site insane. It predates agriculture, it predates pottery, it predates permanent settlements as we understood them. For decades, the assumption was that humans farmed first, settled down, built surplus food, and religion came later as a byproduct of organized society. Göbekli Tepe flipped that completely. This means hunter-gatherers, people who didn't even have permanent homes yet, organized themselves well enough to quarry, transport, and erect multi-ton stone pillars, purely for ritual purposes. Religion wasn't a product of civilization. Religion might be the reason civilization happened at all. Think about what that means. Building something like Göbekli Tepe required hundreds of people to cooperate, to show up at the same place at the same time, motivated by something bigger than any individual, not food, not shelter, belief, a shared conviction that something sacred deserved this effort. And once you get hundreds of strangers cooperating around a shared belief, you've essentially built the blueprint for civilization itself. This connects to one of the most compelling theories in modern anthropology, the idea that gods didn't just explain the world, they made large-scale cooperation possible. Here's the problem early humans faced. In a small group of 50 people, everyone knows everyone. If you steal, if you lie, if you cheat, everyone finds out and you face consequences immediately. But as groups grew larger, into the hundreds and eventually thousands, that system broke down. You couldn't watch everyone anymore. Strangers had to trust strangers, and that's an enormous problem for a species that evolved trust in small, tribal units. Gods solved this. If everyone believes an invisible, all-seeing being is watching your behavior even when no human is looking, you have a built-in enforcement system that works at any scale. You don't need someone physically watching you steal, because you believe something already saw it. Researchers studying this call it supernatural punishment theory, and multiple studies have found a real pattern. Societies that believe in moralizing, punishing gods, tend to cooperate better at large scale, tend to have lower rates of cheating in economic games, and tend to expand into larger, more complex civilizations. Belief wasn't just comfort, it was infrastructure. It let thousands of strangers trust each other enough to build cities, share resources, and follow laws none of them personally enforced. There's also a simpler, more emotional reason gods took hold, and it has nothing to do with cooperation or fear. It's comfort. Imagine losing a child to a disease you don't understand in a world with no explanation for illness, no germ theory, no medicine that actually works most of the time. Now imagine believing that child's spirit still exists somewhere, that their suffering had meaning, that you might see them again. That belief doesn't just explain the world, it makes an unbearable reality survivable. Grief without meaning is a kind of psychological injury humans struggle to endure. Gods gave meaning to suffering that otherwise had none. A drought wasn't just cruel randomness, it was a test, a punishment, a lesson, something you could respond to, something you could fix by praying harder, sacrificing more, behaving better. Randomness is terrifying because you can't control it. A god, even an angry one, is something you can negotiate with. There's one more layer worth understanding, and it comes from altered states of consciousness. Long before organized religion, humans were fasting for days during hard seasons, breathing in smoke from fires in enclosed spaces, chewing on certain plants, and dancing themselves into exhaustion around fires late into the night. All of these activities can trigger altered mental states, hallucinations, a sense of leaving the body, feelings of overwhelming connection to something larger than yourself. To modern science, these are explainable neurological events, changes in oxygen, blood sugar, and brain chemistry. To early humans with no framework for any of that, these experiences were undeniable proof of another world layered on top of this one. If you danced around a fire for hours and suddenly felt like you were floating outside your body, watching yourself from above, that wasn't your brain running low on glucose. That was you visiting somewhere else. Shamans and spiritual leaders across nearly every ancient culture ever documented used exactly these techniques deliberately, not by accident, to access what they believed were higher realities. And when someone comes back from an experience like that and describes what they saw with total conviction, it's incredibly persuasive to everyone listening around that fire. By around 6,000 years ago, as cities in Mesopotamia grew larger, gods evolved right alongside them. They stopped being vague nature spirits and started getting names, personalities, family trees, and jobs. There were gods of harvest, gods of war, gods of the underworld, entire bureaucracies, mirroring the increasingly complex human societies that invented them. This wasn't a coincidence either. As human social structures got more complicated, kings, laws, taxes, hierarchies, the gods people worshipped got more complicated too. Religion didn't just explain nature anymore, it started explaining and justifying power. Kings claimed to rule by divine right. Priesthoods became institutions with real political influence. What began as a psychological response to fear and uncertainty had transformed into one of the most powerful organizing forces in human history. So here's the honest answer to the question this video started with. Ancient humans didn't invent gods because they were foolish or gullible. They invented gods because their brains were built to detect intention in a world full of danger, because they were the first species capable of dreading their own death, because they could imagine minds other than their own, and because living in large, complex societies required a way to make strangers trust each other. Gods weren't a mistake early humans made before they knew better. Gods were a solution their minds built to survive a world that offered no other answers, and in many ways that need never disappeared. It just changed shape. We still crave explanations for randomness. We still fear death and search for meaning in it. We still build systems of trust bigger than any one person can personally verify. The forms have changed across thousands of years. Spirits, ancestors, sky gods, moral gods, entire religions with sacred texts and global followings, but the underlying human need hasn't moved an inch. We are still the same species standing in the dark, watching the shadows move, and needing to believe that someone or something is behind it. If this made you see religion a little differently, subscribe, because there are more videos coming that dig into the psychology and history behind the beliefs that shaped human civilization. And before you go, here's a question worth sitting with. If you had been born 40,000 years ago, with no science, no explanations, and death all around you, do you think you would have believed in something too? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.